Welcome to Taiwan Context. I'm Donovan Smith, your host. And with me today in studio is Boston Paul Davis. Now, Boston Paul is legendary in Taiwan for many of his accomplishments, including as a famous photographer, musician. He's been in many bands, traveled around the island. He photographs a lot of festivals, and he has held and organized a lot of festivals as well. He's got an extremely colorful past, and he also happens to be one of the best friends I've ever had. So, welcome to the studio, Paul.
I love you, man.
I love you too. All right. You've been in Taiwan for quite a long time, but you have quite an interesting backstory here on what happened before you got here and the transformation that you underwent when you came here. And I think that's really quite an interesting story. But can you give us a little bit of the backstory about what was the path that you followed before you got here?
Well, my mother and father got together, kissed, and made love, and I popped out 9 months later. That's the beginning.
and both of them immediately looked at each other and went, he's going to Taiwan.
Yep. Yeah, they gave me a Chinese name and everything. No.
Yes.
Seriously, though, my parents were quite conservative. I totally wasn't. I grew up a militant hippie, so to speak, a tough guy, had the long hair and Jimi Hendrix. Mm-hmm. But I was like kind of a poor kid that grew up in a rich town.
I have some experience with that, yeah.
Yeah, you and I have discussed that many times. And didn't quite fit in, so when I was about 16, I left home, went out on my own. When I was 17, I hitchhiked to what I thought was going to be Haight-Ashbury Street in California, San Francisco, but I ended up in Arizona because I had made a collect phone call home. Mm-hmm. This was before cell phones and whatnot. My mom's dad, my grandfather, was in the hospital, and they lived in Arizona. So I ended up hanging out in Arizona for a while, and I won't get into details, but I had a life-changing experience in Arizona with one of the Native American tribes out there, and partook in a cactus shake, a cactus smoothie. We'll just leave it like that. So when I came back, I thought I was just going to kind of live this kind of biker, hippie life kind of thing. I ended up joining the military. Some people have described me, to my face no less, a little bit on the extreme side. If I'm going to do something, I usually just go all out. So instead of just joining the military, I wanted to do something cool. Mm-hmm. So I joined the Red Berets. I jumped out of airplanes for the 3 or 4 years I was in, 82nd Airborne, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Then when I get out, that's a whole other interview if you wanted to talk about my military past. Then I get into law enforcement. Mm-hmm. Because I was a vet, I was accepted in UMass Boston, where I majored in philosophy and English. I was in law enforcement, which was kind of weird.
Studying philosophy and English.
And studying philosophy and English and hanging out with these hippies, but also hanging out with these ate-up, short-haired, carrying guns. And it's just kind of a weird dichotomy.
So I, of course, that immediately brings an image to mind of reading someone their Miranda rights with a Shakespearean accent and then asking them about whether or not they truly comprehend on a fundamental level what this really means to their existence.
You have the right to not say anything. But because of all that, and the reason, it is a bit of a colorful past, but that's really the road that led me to Taiwan. If one of those components was missing in the story, I would not be here right now. Because of my political views, I wasn't really getting promoted. I don't want to get into details, but I don't agree with all the laws in America. Those laws have since changed since I've come to Taiwan. So, but we won't get into details. But yeah, anyone out there listening kind of knows what I'm talking about. If wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So I ended up having to learn Chinese so I could work in Chinatown, which would be like my little loophole to promotion and more money. I was dating a Taiwanese girl in Boston at the time. One of my Chinese teachers, I took Chinese philosophy from her, I took Chinese literature and Chinese Mandarin. I took Mandarin from her as well. And she told me about a program here in Taichung at Donghai University. and UMass Boston and Donghai University were sister schools. And I was a vet. The government was paying a little bit. If I learned, it'd be 100% free if I learned in Massachusetts. But if I came to Taiwan, they'd pay half the tuition. I just had to get an airplane ticket, So yeah, I came out here in the summer of 93 for the first time. Yep. And when I went back after a full summer, June to August, first week of September, I started back at work, and they're like, "Do you speak Chinese?" And I'm like, So I came back in 94 for another summer semester at Donghai and met some friends and just fell in love with the country. When I graduated university at the end of 94, I added an extra semester on so I could finish my philosophy degree. I moved here in January of 95. So that's the backstory of me getting here.
Once you arrived here, it's fair to say you underwent quite an interesting transformation going from being a vet, a cop. When I met you in the late 90s, that was definitely not your image. Nobody would perceive you as a cop, other than the fact that you're very muscly and well built. People wouldn't immediately associate you with being a cop or an ex-vet. So what happened in the late 90s that totally threw you off the straight and narrow path?
Well, I always said that, a lot of people, they take Xanax and do other drugs to kind of fight their demons or whatever, go to psychiatrists to work out the crap in their head. And for me, it was Taiwan therapy. I called it Taiwan therapy. I just took myself out of the box that I was in the States, all that pressure of having to be number one and having to be a tough guy all the time and getting out of my car and punching someone in the nose, which actually I did that when I first got here in Taiwan as well. But
I'm sure that went down really well.
Yeah. Well, there were no cameras on the streets back then, luckily. I could never do that now, but they deserved it. They were very, very bad. That's a red light, not a guideline. But besides that, I was just able to relax and pursue things that I loved to do. Like I was a musician in the States as well, but I didn't get to really pursue that at all. And I was doing photography while I was in the States as well. And I always had a camera on me. I was always taking pictures, film back then, of course, which I have been posting some of those online here and there, like you can see some photos from 30 years ago. But here in Taiwan, I was just able to develop that. And there's certain types of people that come to Taiwan, and a lot of them, for whatever reason, left their home country. The Taiwanese are very friendly and supportive. Really. There's an undercurrent of racism. Sometimes it's reverse racism, but you deal with that. But as a white guy, basically, in Taiwan, I haven't had total discrimination, or I've experienced a little bit here, and I'm sure you have as well. But
you have in the press, yes?
Yeah, no, I definitely have in the press, yeah. But yeah, living in Taiwan, I was able to meet some unbelievable people, foreigners from all over the world that became fellow musicians, fellow artists, fellow photographers, confidants, just people, you being one of them. My buddy Dong Yang, one of my first friends in Taiwan, actually, I met him at the gym. James Tinker is another one. Just fellow artists, fellow musicians, and I was able to flourish that way. The other things that happened later, they were organic, doing festivals and things like that. I happened to move into a pretty big house with a big yard and a dead-end street right after the big earthquake in 99 with no neighbors, and that's kind of how the Refuge gets started. And from there, LUVstock gets started, and all these things were kind of grassroots, organic, kind of grew whether I wanted to or not. I just kind of went with the flow. I was like the groovy surfer surfing on the wave of, how you doing?
All right, well, let me set the stage a little bit before this. You went through a period where you had your own bushibon, so you did business here for a little while. You had some other positions as well. I got to know you originally as a photographer. But to set the stage for the Refuge, now there's several iterations of the Refuge here. You mentioned it was the end of a street. Let me set the stage a little bit here for the listener here to understand. Now, this is up, if you know Taichung, it's up in the Dakan area. When you moved up there, it wasn't that popular of an area to live in. And the street that you lived on, most of the houses had actually been abandoned.
Yeah.
So there was no noise issues.
Nope.
And it was surrounded by, it was up in the kind of these hills, beautiful, lush jungle all around and abandoned houses surrounding you. You had this big house with a decent sized yard. You set up the living room and basically removed the glass doors set up a roof there, and turned the living room into a stage.
Yeah, big stage, yep.
A little bit later on, built a bar out in the yard. So it was a really nice place to hang out.
Yep.
Go up there and people would be jamming. Sometimes bands would formally be playing. Usually it was just people hanging out and jamming, and an open mic, loose, whatever.
Yep.
Happening
almost every day back then.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, it was, it was a scene. Really more than I think anything else, if that would be an accurate way to describe it.
I think so.
I'm kind of trying to summarize it here for the listener here, but it built a large community of people, musicians, artists, just all-around fun people would come up here, up into the hills, up into the mountains, beautiful air, birds singing, butterflies.
Yeah. Green grass to
Green grass.
Walk around barefoot.
Yeah, walk around barefoot. There'd be fires in a fire pit. You could lay in the grass. It was a really wonderful atmosphere. Aside from the physical location, what do you think really built this sense of community? Because the Refuge community became a thing. It became a scene that was very much centered around you and Sandra and this location. And what do you think were the magic elements that made this scene happen?
Well, I mean, like anything, really, your friends.
Other than you being absolutely gorgeous and loquacious.
That's subjective, but yeah. We'd get together and we'd have our hand drums and our acoustic guitars, and we'd be able to jam until the sun came up, which happened quite often on the weekends. There was a couple other foreigners that moved into the neighborhood as well. Jess and Dan. We do basic aid with those guys, and they had since moved to India, but they lived across the street. We'd all get together and have some drinks, hang out, and make music. The more people that came, the more I realized I needed more equipment. Yeah. My first soundboard was a mini disc player. A lot of Americans don't even know what a mini disc is, but it's basically a little CD and a little thing that you could record. It's like the size of a cigarette pack. And I've got hundreds of those with tons of music for years and years of music. I bought my first soundboard and then Spin. That's how I learned sound engineering. All of a sudden I was doing sound for friends that would come over with their band. And then instead of going out on my birthday in July, I would just have my birthday at the house and we'd get 50, 60 people there. And then after a couple of years, bands would be like, hey, can I play at your birthday party? And so I had to beef up the equipment a little bit so I could plug all the band people in, all the musicians. And that was Paul's birthday. There was a magazine. I'm not sure if it was the Taiwan Voice or 24/7, but one of those magazines. They did an article about my birthday. I think they called it LUVstock.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So my birthday became LUVstock, and everybody realized it's like, this is a thing now. I thought a bit pretentious calling this new kind of grassroots thing, name it after me. I didn't want to do that. A bunch of us hummed and hawed, come up with some different names, and we just ended up calling it LUVstock. Let me backtrack real quick. The way the Refuge got its name was people would just come up on the weekends from the city. They would drive down past Beitunlu, up Dongshan, like, where the hell are we going? And my place wasn't really easy to find.
Yes, I remember. I think one time we actually ran into each other because I happened to be up that way.
Yeah.
And I was coming back, and I actually tried to see if I could remember the way to get there, and then bumped into you on the road.
You had to want to be there.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be there, you'd find it eventually.
There were big crowds that show up.
Oh,
it was definitely one of these things. You had to be in the know, but once you were in the know, you were going to show.
You were going to, yeah. We should make that into a rap rhyme. So people come in. That's one of the reasons why we had to move LUVstock out of the Refuge. And we ended up finding that.
Did you move LUVstock out first, or did you move the Refuge out first?
LUVstock got moved out first.
Okay.
Yeah.
And about when was this?
That would have been 2000. Let's see. I think the first official LUVstock would have been 2006, 2007, 2006 maybe. I think I even have T-shirts. I made like 50 T-shirts. I think you miid have one, right? A purple one.
I might, yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of LUVstock shirts.
Got a lot of LUVstock shirts, yeah. In like maybe 2005, 2007 or 2008, I think we moved it to LUVstock to Dongshan Paradise. And we ended up having 700 people there. We had to move it out of our house because we had 300 people. It was flowing out into the street. I think we might have even had a small stage out in the street and in the yard, right? So it got really big. We were like, yeah, we can't. Because by then, there were more and more neighbors were moving in, and they were like, okay.
Yeah,
it was starting.
It was starting to become cool to live up in the hills.
It was starting to become cool, and people were like, Taiwanese were buying houses in the neighborhood, and so we didn't have that freedom to make noise all night anymore. So, we had to move the LUVstock out.
So you moved to Dongshan Paradise. Now, to set the stage here, just sort of quickly for the audience here, Dongshan Paradise was an amusement park that was big in the 80s and into the 90s and then closed.
Yep, financial reasons.
It was an abandoned, overgrown amusement park.
Lots of character.
With all kinds of rides, a giant gorilla, dinosaurs, amusement rides that have been overgrown. In terms of a place to have a music festival, it's really hard to imagine a more cool atmospheric location than in an abandoned amusement park.
Quite a few of them.
It was really quite the location. So, awesome. All right, so go on.
We had the festival there the first year. I think the next year, we actually moved the Refuge from our house to the park because we had
to Dongshan Paradise.
To Dongshan Paradise. So, I have to backtrack again. People would come in from the city and be laying in the grass and be like, oh, this is such a refuge from the city.
And you'd have the fire going.
And we had the fire going, and we had a refrigerator full of drinks for people, and it was often potluck. People would bring their food over, and we'd all share. It was a little bit of a hippie commune. It was kind of cool. Not everybody was a hippie, but
laid back people.
Just
people who wanted to get out of town.
And
enjoy a little nature, some good music.
So it was pretty cool because when we opened the park when we opened the Refuge at the park, I wasn't able to hang out with as many people on such a personal level. But when it was still at our house, I was really able to get to know people. A lot of people were like, hey, I'm a bit of an artist. I did some paintings, and could I show them here? John Renzella, one of his first art shows in Taiwan was at the Refuge at our house.
I think you're right.
He put up a whole bunch of things.
John Renzella, by the way, is one of the founders of Le Gallery.
Le Gallery, yeah.
Which is kind of an institution.
It was kind of nice seeing this doe-eyed kind of newbie in Taiwan, and it's such a cool guy. We're from the same neck of the woods as well, and both from the Northeast. And
super nice guy.
Nice guy, and it was nice to kind of see him kind of grow into what is now. He started doing tattoos, and he's just a nice guy.
He's had some art shows, and I think his art spread to some.
And he's brought in other artists. So it's
Le Gallery now. I mean, him and Pranita have done a lot to really promote arts in Taichung.
John is one example, and then musicians that would come and like, hey, do you mind if I play a little guitar with you guys? I'm like, yeah, of course. They're like, well, I'm not very good. I haven't played in a long time. I'm like, get your butt up on the stage. We'll plug you in. And then you see them in a band 6 months later. It's just a great feeling to be there to kind of give everyone their little boost or a little kick in the pants or whatever, I
got the vibe that it was doors were open.
Doors were open, yeah.
In other words, these are people who showed up because they were yearning for something kind of an outlet.
But also encouragement, too.
And a refuge.
A lot of people were a refuge, and they didn't have a chance in the city to do these things. I know Wade and Jimmy, back in the 90s, they would find these little places. I remember there was this one kind of underground army.
The Gubal. Yeah.
I didn't know that then. I found out a couple of years later what they were doing. Those were
interesting parties, yeah.
And those were interesting parties. And
we talked about that in the interview with Wade Davis,
which we will link to in the... So, it was this thing. But also, I like to encourage people to go for it because that's the kind of person I am. I get an idea and go for it. And if I fail, I fail. And I'd rather fail than not do it at all, And
And often you succeed, but you also encourage a lot of other people too.
I think that was the point of the Refuge was me being able to be in people's lives like that. I need to.
I like to intervene in their lives. And make them better people.
Yeah, I mean, to help someone be a better person helps me to be a better person.
Yes.
I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway. But yeah,
you're a vampire of goodness.
That's how the Refuge started anyway. I didn't technically really name it. It was just so many people came and hung out. People just knock on the door and lay in the grass with the guitar and just be there all day, kind of playing the guitar while I did whatever I was doing around the house or whatever. It was kind of a chill, nice time. And it just grew and grew. And you have to start with a core and a base and a foundation. We were at the right place at the right time. And I think that's kind of what happened. And after that, it became beyond me. How do I do this? And then when it became a business, when we moved to the park, now I had to pay bills. Like, we didn't go there for free. We weren't squatting there. We had to pay rent. I was trying to do it so musicians were being treated fairly, but I still needed to pay the rent. And I didn't want to handle the business aspect of it, but I had to. I got pushed into it. I learned a lot. I think now if I were able to go back in time, I would do things a lot differently. But it was a learning experience, how to do business in Taiwan, how to deal with red tape and government and cops and all kinds of noise complaints and all kinds of stuff. Well, at the Refuge, the LUVstock had noise complaints because we had the 3 stages outside, but the Refuge itself, we were inside and pretty soundproof. It was pretty cool. But then they sold the land.
Well, let's go back a little bit, actually. Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about 2 things. The first being is some of the LUVstocks themselves. And at this location at Dongshan Luyuan, the Dongshan Paradise was the English name. Early on, and when I got involved, the stages were much closer to the entrance. Mm-hmm. But it was the second year that I was involved as assistant volunteer. Yeah. You moved the main stage. Now, this is quite a dramatic image here.
Pretty insane.
The stages kind of moved around different years. Yeah. For example, one year there was that
hot tub stage.
The hot tub stage. Yeah. The first year that was the main stage. Yeah. Of course, the hot tubs were empty.
Well, the
long
ones on the
since
side,
abandoned.
The ones on the side weren't.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, the ones on the side.
There was the one in the back, yes.
Yeah, there were two.
Which in later years was, of course, for the volunteers, which was very appreciated.
Yeah.
We really needed the rest. Yeah. There would be stages, for example, right next to the go-karts. The bumper cars.
The bumper cars. That was the bumper car stage, yeah.
There was a DJ stage at this weird concrete faux boat. Yeah. The character of all these stages was quite remarkable. But the main stage, and this created a lot of problems, everything from flooding to...
When it worked, though. Yeah.
But it worked. When you moved the main stage into this giant...
Swimming pool, yeah.
It was a giant swimming pool where there was a lot of stands, where presumably at one point they had performances in the pool.
Yeah, I think
maybe dolphins
and stuff. And they had a stage there, too, with speakers. And it was a proper, like, Metallica could play on that stage. It was a big-ass stage.
Oh, yeah. So you had these stands, which presumably at one time was watching water ballet or dolphins or whatever the shows were. So now these stands were filled with people watching the bands, but then the dance floor itself was the bottom of the pool.
The bottom of the pool, yeah.
Right above that, of course, you had the stage.
Yeah.
It was quite a big open area. Yeah. People are dancing in an empty pool. Yeah. The sound was fantastic.
The sound was Joey.
You had all these stands, filled with people.
Yep.
And so the whole thing was just a surreal experience.
Yeah.
But there was kind of a key point here, I think, in the history of all of this, where there was a longer lasting impact. And that was after the Ala fire here in Taichung. And what happened was Taichung had by far the best music scene in Taiwan up until about 2011.
Yeah, we were the center.
And what happened was a lot of people, for example, in Taipei, because it was such a dense, closely packed city, it was so expensive, so people are having to work constantly to pay for their little tiny apartments. Musicians tended to move south to Taichung.
Yeah.
You get bigger apartments, you could find places to rehearse. There was a lively scene in town with lots of venues to perform at. A lot of them, Groove Yard and 89K and Boom and just so many of these fantastic venues.
Yeah.
And then there was a fire where
A la pub.
at the Alla Saxophone Pub, and some people died, and it was a horrible tragedy.
It was a tragedy.
But what ended up happening is there was a major outcry from the public, both political parties, and so basically all of these places had to be shut down.
Everybody shut down, yep.
The city government shut down everything. The live music scene was killed. So the only things that were left were festivals and the Refuge, because the Refuge was not downtown.
No.
And so the Refuge became basically the only live music venue
Yep.
that could play late in the evening. There was a few, like Sound could play until like 6 or 7 in the evening and then had to shut down.
We played until 6 or 7 in the morning sometimes.
Yes. So it was the only place where the old music scene still had an outlet outside of festivals.
Yeah, we had we get a warning. I mean, you make friends over the years, you know, and someone had come in and they knew me. Actually, they knew me because of sound complaints at the Refuge when it was at our house.
Yeah.
One of the cops comes in and he's like, "Hey, how you doing?" Like, "Good." He's like, "Don't you live up on, Dongshanlu behind the university?"
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "Yep." And they're like, "So what's going on here?" I'm like, "Well, I didn't want you to come to my house anymore for noise complaints, so here we are." And he started laughing. It's all in Chinese too, so I was able to. And he's like, "Well, that's great. You care about your neighbors, and that's good." And I was like, "Oh, I've been looking for this place, and now we found it." So he come back about 2 hours later, this cop. He's like, "Hey, look, you're aware of the fire." I'm like, yeah, I am. He goes, "There's going to be some police coming in, some, supervisors, some higher ups are going to be coming in the next day or two to look at your place."
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay. Like, oh no. But it actually worked out pretty sweet. So he was right. Like a day or two later, they came in with their polished boots and like stormtroopers. Like they come in, and the cool thing is it's already legal because it's a park, right? So we had a front door and a back door.
Yeah.
Right. So they come in, they look around, they're like, "So what are you trying to do here?" I was like, "We just want to play music and have a place for people to come. Everything's closed downtown, and we just need a place. It's on private property." And I made sure I said that. Mm-hmm. It's on private property. There's no worries about noise complaints, and we just need a place.
No neighbors, basically.
No neighbors,
very few neighbors.
Very few. Well, in the front.
There was a few. But it's not like downtown where you have thousands of people in the neighborhood, and all you needed was just one person to complain. You had dozens of people in the neighborhood. Yeah.
No, we were good. So they came in, comes over, he goes, "All right, 魏先生你过来一下." Come here, Mr. Wei. My last name in Chinese is Wei, right? Wei Junxiang, Wei. So he's like, "Look this is what you need. And we're going to come back in 2 days to see if you did it. You need fire extinguishers. You need a bunch of them. You need there. You also need very prevalent, obvious exit signs."
Okay. Both of these are reasonable.
Which the next day, boom. Mm-hmm. And my exit signs were pretty awesome. I ended up taking that plastic cardboard. Mm-hmm. I took about the size of your average friend's widescreen, flat screen TV. Mm-hmm. Huge, like that picture right in back of you there. Mm-hmm. 70 inches by... And I drew exit in Chinese and in English, huge, and then put glitter on it. and shined a light on it, and then made a little stick figure running out in panic, and put them on both. Yep. Both, Andrew, remember those?
Yep, I remember.
Put them on both things. So they came in a couple days later, and this guy was like stone faced. If he smiled, his face would have like just cracked. Mm-hmm. And he comes in and he's like, "All right, you got the fire extinguishers?" I was like, "Yep, we got those big exit signs you wanted right over there." And he looks up and he just burst out laughing. He's like, I was like, "Does it work?" He's like, "You're good. You're good." And that was the last time we saw cops at the Refuge, and we were there for 3 solid years. Mm-hmm. And then they sold the land.
Yeah, that's a shame.
I kept everything that was in the Refuge. Remember how much stuff I had, right? Mm-hmm. Everything that was at the Refuge, I just kind of put in my garage on the 3rd floor, and we looked for a place for about a year or so, and it was just tough. So we did start doing small events at the original Refuge again. Mm-hmm. Then the landlords from the original Refuge, the landlord's mom gave the house to her. Oh, I just want to say so many bad things about this guy, but I'm not
I was
going
just
to.
about to, and no.
We shouldn't. But this guy,
unpleasant.
he was
young man?
If anybody wants to hear the story in person, I'll let you know. Find me on Facebook, Boston Paul, or Instagram. Yeah, so we ended up having to move out of there in a rush, and we moved to this house right down the street, which I tried to get a couple things going there, but the house was just basically a toilet with a metal door that came down.
I'm sorry to say, but that's an accurate description. It was not
the best thing about that house was the rooftop garden.
Yes.
Which you populated with plants from when you moved.
Yep.
And then we moved out of there, and now I live in a pretty swank neighborhood, which I really can't do huge parties at. But also COVID hit. So, I've been doing a lot of underground things and friends of friend things, trying to keep safe. And once we get everything under control, I want to get back in the swing of things. I'd like to do another LUVstock, and I'm really looking forward to Compass and some other things that are going on, and kind of all of us getting back into it again. I kind of miss performing on a stage, and I miss being behind the soundboard. I miss promoting. I miss people. Just waiting for those days to come.
You're known for running a live music venue. You're known for music festivals. You've been known as a sound guy for a lot of events you've done. But recently, something that I think has really come to the fore is your photography.
Yeah.
And this is something that has really taken off, I think, in your life. And the material that you've been coming up with has been fantastic. I've been seeing a lot of the great stuff that you've been putting up. I know that word of mouth has been spreading like wildfire. You've been quite busy with it recently.
Yeah, I think it saved me. Because I made pretty good money teaching as well. I teach a lot of privates and things like that. And,
yeah.
Now I'm making about half that, which still pays the bills. But as far as like putting money away, that wasn't going to happen. But I've been shooting weddings. I know a couple of managers that bring their models in, and we do shoots, and aspiring models that need a portfolio, and shooting musicians and bands. That's how I actually cut my teeth here in Taiwan.
Sheriffs, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel bad. I know some foreigners that had to leave Taiwan because of COVID, and they just couldn't make ends meet. I was able to still make ends meet, and it was the photography that actually helped me through that, which is pretty cool. It's kind of nice to do something you love and have it pay the bills as well. I'm always pushing myself musically and artistically, and photography is something that was a hobby right up until about 7 years ago. And now I have a real live studio with lots of equipment and lots of different cameras and lots of lights and all the
expensive cameras,
with
giant lenses.
It's nice. I'm able to pack all that up, and I went out and bought a nice van, so I'm able to pick up my clients in the van, and we're able to go to locations, and I take out I have 3 different cameras and 9 or 10 lenses and lights, and we're able to travel around Taiwan and do our location shoots, and it's been paying the bills, and I've been able even to save a little bit. But yeah, I went from shooting bands at the Refuge for promotional reasons, and because I wanted to give the band something. Because a lot of times, they would just come play, and we paid them what we could, gave them whatever drinks we could, but then I could give them photos of their show, and that's kind of how it started. So my hobby turned into a necessity for promotion and whatnot, and then the necessity turned into an actual company that I run now, and even hire other photographers to help me with my work sometimes.
All right, so why don't we leave it there?
Yeah.
And thank you very much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you very much. I love you, man.
And I love you too. And of course, we're going to have a great evening hanging out after this. But very quickly before we go, if somebody wants to find out about your photography, where do they go, and how do they get in touch with you, and where can they see your work?
Well, I'm on the internets. I'm on Instagram at Boston Paul. Boston, Boston, Paul, everybody knows that, Paul, Pix, Pics, Boston Paul Pics on Instagram and on Facebook. You can also pick up a copy of the Compass. I think I have adverts in there as well, which I need to redo pretty soon.
Could be updated, yes.
Yeah, I need to update it a little bit. Facebook and Instagram, Boston Paul Pics, you can find me there. We're going to look at my work, tell me what you think, leave a comment, give me some love. I'll love you back.
All right. All right, so let's leave it there. Well, thank you for joining us on Taiwan Context. I'm your host, Donovan Smith, here with Boston Paul Davies here in studio. And be sure to tune in next time and check out some of the recent shows. Be sure, of course, to hit like, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, hit that little bell because that gives you notifications. And, of course, be sure to sell all your valuables and spend them all joining us as a patron on patreon.com/Taiwan Report.
Do it.
Thank you very much.
This has been brought to you by the Taiwan Report. For more content like this, become our patron at report.tw.
哎呦，就是那个台湾狗啦，最喜欢我的台湾狗了。